Nice robot voice. Oh, and I think I can see a couple of our young grant makers joining, so that's fantastic. So yeah, other than that, general housekeeping, usual Zoom rules. If you're not speaking, if you could keep yourself muted, that would be great, just so we don't hear any background conversation. And the way the call is going to work today is I'm going to do a bit of a whiz through the kind of the overview of the fund, take you through what the application form looks like in a bit more detail and what your young grant makers will be looking for when they're kind of assessing the applications. And then there'll be plenty of time for questions. So we'll leave a big chunk of time at the end for Q&A. We may well not need the whole hour and a half for the webinar today. It might just be an hour. It kind of depends how many questions we get. So see how you get on. And also if you've asked your question at the end and you're ready to head off, that's fine as well. I won't be offended if you leave a bit early. Oops, sorry, I'm clicking next on the wrong bit. So today is all about Step Into the Arts, which is a fund to support young people's creative development. It has been designed by a team of young people who worked as our young grant makers, and it is a partnership between Creative Scotland and Youth Scotland. Oh, sorry, we've got someone struggling with audio. Is everyone else all right to hear? We've got some thumbs up and some nods. Yeah, I'm really sorry, Samsung. I know it's not your real name. I think it is just your account, so I'm not quite sure what we can do for you there. Might be a case of coming back in and seeing if it works on a second go, but I'm sorry if you've already tried that. So that is our sort of overview of the fund. It's a partnership between Creative Scotland and Youth Scotland. The funding comes from the National Lottery Community Fund and Creative Scotland, and Youth Scotland's kind of got on board as the youth participation partner. So we've been facilitating the process of the young grant makers setting up the fund. So I know we do have a couple on the call today, young grant makers. I don't know if you're up for doing a quick overview of what you got up to on your weekend when you were setting up Step Into the Arts. No worries if you're not up for that, but if you are, do you want to give me a thumbs up? Is that potentially? No worries if not. All right, I'll give you I can't see if we're getting head shakes or head yeses, so no worries, I'll give you, no, okay, that's fine. So I'll do the introduction, but then if I get anything wrong, you can correct me or stick anything in the chat that you would like to. So the aim of Step Into the Arts is to provide opportunities and support for young people to get involved with the arts, but especially those young people who might not usually be able to access them. So in order to come up with this aim and the criteria for the fund, our young grant makers spent a weekend at the Inverclyde National Sports Training Centre, sort of digging deep into what they needed to learn skills as young grant makers, so leadership skills, decision-making skills, how to have difficult conversations, how to prioritise, and also spent quite a lot of time thinking about what art is, why it's beneficial to young people, who they wanted to support through this fund, and used all of that to create the aim and the criteria that you're about to hear. There's £65,000 available overall, which is for young people aged 5 to 25 from all across Scotland. So it's a really nice amount of money. Hopefully we can support a lot of young people through this. Who can apply? So it's open to young people aged 5 to 25. They must be living in Scotland. And we are also making an exception for young people up to the age of 30 if they are facing significant barriers to accessing the arts. So in those cases, young people can apply up to the age of 30. And we'll talk a little bit more about barriers as we go through the presentation. You can apply as an individual or a team of 2 or in a group of 3 or more. And that's the young people applying. And we've divided the fund into 2 strands. So this was, again, a sort of reflection from the young grant makers on some learnings that Creative Scotland provided from previous funds that they've run, that there tend to be kind of 2 categories of young people interested in applying. And those are the first steps, kind of trying out arts for the first time or have a little bit of experience and know that arts are really positive for their mental health or something similar. And then the next steps, who are young people who are really passionate about art, have done lots of it, maybe have studied it, might want to do something creative in the future and kind of want to go for something a bit more ambitious. So first steps, like I said, it's those young people who have some, a little or no experience with the arts and want to explore them further. Next steps is for the young people who have experience in the arts, want to improve their practice, and might even be thinking about a creative career somewhere down the line. So the criteria for these projects are here. So the number one criteria, the one that all of the projects must fulfill, is that they must be completely youth-led. So that means that the idea comes from the young people, that they will be carrying out the project, that they get a say in how the money is spent, that they'll be managing that budget. We are aware that it's a really broad age range, and young people down to the age of 5 might not be able to write an application form necessarily, might need a bit of support. So that is absolutely fine. We know that young people might be working with supporting adults, whether that's a parent or a guardian or a youth worker. But we must see evidence that the projects really are youth-led, that the idea comes from the young people and that they're involved in that application process and that they will be carrying out the project. So that's the number one thing, most important. We've also got these other 5 criteria. So these are to enable young people to access the arts who might otherwise face barriers to access, that use arts to support young people's self-expression, that use arts to support young people's mental health and well-being, and that use arts to get young people's voices heard and perspectives heard. And finally, projects that will have a lasting impact on the young people doing the project. So again, these are the criteria that the young grant makers really felt were important for young people engaging with the arts. You don't have to meet all of the criteria, although again, we recognise there's a lot of crossover between them. So if you're meeting some of them, it's quite likely that you will be meeting other criteria as well. And projects that meet 3 or more of the criteria will be prioritised. So when we're looking at the applications, young grant makers will look at those ones first that tick 3 or more of those criteria. And so we've just had a few more people coming in. Sorry, Martin, if you got thrown out. I don't know how that happened. Promise that wasn't me. But yeah, hopefully you'll catch up, and if you've got any questions, I'll make time at the end to go over anything that you've missed. So next section. So this is a lovely visual representation of some of the work that the young grant makers did during their planning weekend when they were coming up with the idea for Step Into the Arts. You'll see it's a mixture of some of their drawings, some of their quotes and thoughts about what art means, including sort of the different mediums that could include, but also the different ways it can make you feel or the different tools it can be used for personal development. So there's a huge broad spectrum, and I hope this shows you the kind of depth and breadth of different projects that young people could be applying to do. If you can't see your particular medium on here, if there's an art form that isn't on here that you want to do, that's absolutely fine. You can get as creative as possible. You know, one of the things on here is thinking outside the box. And the Young Grant Makers and Creative Scotland were both really keen to see sort of new forms of art or combined forms of art. So yeah, that's really up to the young people. But this is just a sort of inspiration point that the Young Grant Makers started with. How much can you apply for? So this is crucial information. So this is divided into the first steps and the next step strands, as well as the sort of individuals, teams of 2, or the groups, 3 or more young people. So if you're an individual or team of 2, it's the same for both strands. So it's up to £1,000 for either first steps or for next steps. The difference is in the groups of 3 or more. So if it's a group of 3 young people or more, for first steps, you can apply for between £500 and £2,000. For next steps, you can apply for between £500 and £3,000. And that's really in recognition of the fact that we expect that the next steps projects might be, not always, but might be slightly more ambitious and therefore need slightly more budget to execute. What can the funding cover? So again, crucial information. It can cover equipment, so that's tools that you need for your project that might last you a long time and also be reused for the young people. So that could be easels, cameras, speakers, kind of other reusable equipment that would facilitate arts activities for young people. Materials, so that is supplies you need that won't last a long time or potentially aren't reusable, so things like paper, paints, pencils. The Young Grant Makers had a sort of suggestion that should make up to 20% of your budget. However, that's just a kind of guideline. So if you are applying for a project that is primarily materials based, if it's mostly sort of paints and paper that you need to get your project off the ground, that is fine. It just might be worth sort of making a note as to why you haven't applied for anything, that's kind of reusable and lasts a bit longer. It could be used on venues if you're putting on an event or having some sort of sessions, refreshments for events or sessions, trips to art-based events in Scotland. Got more of this list as well. Course fees, facilitators, tutors or specialist staff support, travel expenses incurred during young people's projects, reimbursement for loss of earnings if the young person is in employment and needs to take time off to attend a course or run an event. And finally, professional fees or time to complete the project can also be charged. So young people can sort of give themselves a professional fee as part of that budget. This probably applies more to the next steps projects, not to say it couldn't apply to the first steps as well. And obviously would also need to consider the amount of budget available, but that is also acceptable. Creative Scotland are really keen to make sure that young people feel their time is reimbursed if they're putting in effort as if it's a professional project. What can't you apply for? This should probably come as no surprise. So alcohol, cigarettes or vapes, purchasing land or building works, which again would be pretty difficult with the budgets available, but that's not something we can fund through this, and trips overseas. And I would say that neither of those lists are completely exhaustive. So if there's something you're thinking of for your project that wasn't listed there, that you think is still like a valid expense, that's probably fine. If you're not sure, come and ask me. I've got my email on the final slide, but also we can obviously cover that in the Q&A later as well. How to apply. So you complete the application form and send it to me. That's my email address. You can submit the about your project section in video, audio, or another creative format. If you want to do that, there's a tick box on the application form. You'd still need to complete section 1 and section 3 of the application form, but you don't have to write out the questions for section 2. So we'll look at that in a bit more detail with the application form. But you tick that and then you would attach whatever your creative format is to that email when you're sending through your form. We thought we wanted to include that just because it is a creative fund. We love seeing young people's ideas presented in a really creative way. And it might be more fun to submit it like that, and it also might be more accessible for some young people not to write everything out. So we wanted to include that option. Those will still be assessed in the same way as the written applications, and they will still need to cover the same content, make sure they're answering the questions. The first deadline for the fund is Monday 1st of May. So we've kind of got 2 deadlines for this, but the way it's going to work is after the 1st of May, we're going to review how many applications we've had. Depending on how many we have, we can either sort of close the fund at that point, or we'll be reopening it and running it until the end of May, the 26th, to give a few more young people a chance to apply. And that was simply just because we didn't want to have it open for a really long time, get absolutely loads and loads of applications and leave lots of young people disappointed. So it will just depend a little bit on the demand for the fund in that first section. But if you definitely want your application to be reviewed, get it in before the 1st of May. So onto the application form, and then once we've done this, I will stop talking and let people ask questions because I realise there's a lot of me talking. So we're just going to look in a bit more detail at the various sections so that you've got a real idea of what we'll be looking for, what the young grant makers will be considering when they're reviewing applications. So you'll see on section 1, there's kind of the obvious stuff of name, contact details, all of that. So I've not included that because that felt relatively self-explanatory, but it's worth saying about that. We are looking for the young people's information there. There is a place where you can indicate that you're a supporting adult helping with the form, and there's a place where you can put your contact details in lower down on the form. But we are keen to hear about the lead young person who's applying, or the group of young people who are applying. So that's worth bearing in mind for that section. Are you applying as an individual or team of 2, or a group, which is 3 or more young people? And that will change how much you're applying for. So that's really important to get that right. If you're applying for more than one person, pop their names and ages in this box. And then here you've got the option to say whether you're the young person or young people completing the application form, or if it's a supporting adult with the input of the young person or young people. That won't affect the outcome of your application. There's a question later on in the form where you can really evidence that kind of youth-led nature of the project. So this is really just for us to understand who's completing the form. Which strand are you applying for? Again, those 2 strands we talked about: first steps or next steps into the arts, If you're still not quite sure which one you fit into, that's absolutely fine. You're welcome to come to me and ask. But we hope that the notes and the guidance that kind of help give you a bit of clarity around that. Again, about you section continued. So if you're part of a youth group, Youth Scotland, many of you guys on the call I can see are Youth Scotland members. I think we've got a few people who aren't as well. So if you're a young person who attends a youth group that is part of Youth Scotland, this is just for us to help understand what support network you've got in place that might be helping you with the project. That might not apply to everyone, and again, it won't affect the outcome of your application. It just gives us a bit of a better understanding of how you've heard about us, how you've heard about the fund, and what support you've got in place. So if you're part of a youth group that's a Youth Scotland member, tick yes, give us the name of your youth group, give us the postcode of your youth group. But if that's not relevant to you, that's absolutely fine. Application section 2. So this is the about your project section. This is where if you want to, you can decide to put in this section of the application in sort of creative format. So if you wanted to do that, you tick this box here and still submit the Microsoft Word form, but just don't write out the answers to the following questions. You'd submit your creative format alongside the sort of information in section 1 and section 3. Answers all have a maximum word limit. I would emphasize, really don't feel like you have to write up to the word limit. All we need is to really understand what you're trying to tell us. So if you feel like you can achieve that in fewer words than we've put as the maximum word limit, that's absolutely fine. We just put the max in there to make sure people don't feel like they have to write essays and essays. Section 1, you'll be ticking which criteria your project meet. This one, the top one about being youth-led, is pre-ticked for you because that's our required criteria. And then you can tick the rest depending on whether or not you think your project meets those. Tell us about your project. What will you do? How will you do it? And why do you want to do it? Again, that's relatively self-explanatory, but do remember it can be as creative as you like. It can be whatever creative art forms you want. You know, it could be as ambitious or as small as you like. For example, it might be that a young person is keen to try out a bit of painting or drawing at home and they want some equipment to do that because they think it would be really great for their mental health. Or it might be that a group of young people have been doing a few drama sessions and they're really keen to put on their own show of some sort and they want to book a venue, you know, get an audience in, do some promotion. So it's a real big scope for what you can and can't do. How will this money help you achieve your project? So that's really where you get to tell us what you'd spend the money on. Is it going on all that equipment? Is it venues? Is it facilitators? Why will it help you achieve what you're trying to achieve? What barriers have you faced? So in our guidance notes in the frequently asked questions, there is a section on barriers as well. But just thinking about this, again, the young grant makers were very keen that the fund was reaching young people who maybe might not always have the chance to engage with the creative arts. And some of the barriers that we discussed that might mean that young people felt less able to take part were things like financial barriers, so money. Obviously, arts can be quite expensive. Equipment for arts can be quite expensive, so not everyone can afford it. That's one barrier we discussed. We discussed location. You know, if you're slightly more rurally based, sometimes there's not a huge amount of arts activities going on near you. You might need extra funding to get into a central area where you can engage with a show or with an exhibition. So that's another one that we talked about. We also talked about learning difficulties or disabilities that might mean accessing art stuff is slightly more complicated or you need a little bit more support to do so. And finally, we discussed kind of underrepresented voices in the arts. So that could be through being part of an ethnic minority community, might be that you're part of the LGBTQIA+ community and you feel like you don't see voices that represent your experience as much, maybe your care experience. So it could be a whole range of things. And it's really your perspective on it that we're interested in hearing. If you feel that there's any barriers that have stopped you from engaging with creative arts that you would really like to overcome through using this fund. Tell us how this project is youth-led. So again, that's your chance to really evidence that #1 criteria. So tell us where the idea came from. How did the young people come up with it? That sort of thing, just so we really get a sense for the young people who are putting this project forward and why they want to do it. What difference will the project make to you, your group, or your community? So again, that's relatively self-explanatory and slightly speaking to that final criteria about any lasting impact. Could be around mental health. It could be around sort of getting young people's voices heard when they haven't been before. There'll be lots of different outcomes from these projects for sure. When will you start your project and how long will it take? So Creative Scotland have been very flexible on the sort of timelines of these projects. We will do a check-in with our successful applicants kind of 6 months in, and we would expect that something has been started by then, but we will not necessarily prescribe that your projects need to be done by a certain point. So that can be quite flexible. So yeah, that's really the only thing you need to consider when you're answering that question. It's just useful for us to know the sort of scale. Section 3 is the money. So again, this is completed by everyone, whether or not you're submitting it in a creative format. Here it's just a real breakdown of what you're spending, what item it is, what's the estimated cost, you know, venue, £300, whatever it is. We realise that costs might shift around a little bit. Obviously, you'd be submitting your application now, and successful applicants will probably be receiving their funding in sort of July time. So yeah, it might shift around the actual cost of the things you've listed here, and we understand that will happen. We won't be checking up really exactly on that. We just want an estimated cost. So we'd like to see a little bit of evidence that you've kind of researched what you think things will cost roughly. And then tell us how you'd like to receive the funding if you're successful. So if you're age 13 or under, probably don't have a bank account, but also we can't pay directly into your bank account. So you would need to select either option 2 or option 3. If you are aged a bit older than that and you still want to select option 2 or 3, that's absolutely fine. We will need a recent bank statement from any bank account that you would like us to pay money into. That will not, again, affect the outcome of your application in any way. That's just for us to be able to verify bank details and make sure that we're paying into the correct account. We've also got a box here for you to explain why you've selected the payment method that you've selected. So if you select that you want it paid into your own bank account and you're age 14 or over, that's fine. You don't have to add anything to this section. If you're part of a Youth Scotland member group and you would like the money to be paid directly to your youth group and then distributed to you, that's also fine. Again, you don't need to put anything in this section. But if for the other categories, just let us know who it is that will be receiving the funding and why you've chosen them, that sort of thing. Supporters. So again, I think I mentioned at the beginning, we do want to make sure that everyone has a bit of a support network in place for this funding. So what we would really hate is for you to be successful and then feel really overwhelmed by the pressure of trying to get your project off the ground. We want to make sure that it's a really positive, exciting thing for everyone, and it's all about your creative development. And we'll be on hand to help. You can contact us. You've got my details. We'll kind of be checking in gently, but you know, it really is all about the young people having a positive experience. So that's why we look at supporters as well. So you'll be asked to put in 2 supporters, could be a parent, guardian, carer, teacher, youth worker, friend, anyone else who's in your life that you think would be a really good supporter for your application. And that is hopefully someone who, if you are struggling a little bit with managing the money or getting your project off the ground, they can give you a little bit of advice and a little bit of support. And we'll ask them just to write 1 sentence why they support the application. So there'll be 2 requests for those. Sections 5 and 6, super self-explanatory. It's signatures and consent, so covering data protection, media consent, if you would be okay with your photos being on Youth Scotland social media and Creative Scotland social media, and confirming that the information you've put in the application is true. And finally, section 6 is just for those who are under 16. That would be parent or guardian consent for you to apply. So that's an overview of the application form. I'll quickly go through what happens next if you after you've applied, and then I'm going to stop talking and take some questions. So what happens next? Our Young Grant Makers panel meets on the 10th and 11th of June to do the decision making on this fund. So that's when they'll be reviewing all the applications. That means that we'll notify everyone of the outcome of their application by 10th of July at the absolute latest, but likely as not, it'll be a bit sooner than that. If you're successful, we'll then organise that payment into your chosen payment method as quickly as possible so you can get started. We'll ask you to keep hold of receipts just in case we need to do a follow-up check, but we won't ask you to submit them, but do hold on to them. And after 6 months, we'll send you some kind of little questions, a bit of a check-in to see how you're getting on with your project. Then after that, there might be some further opportunities to kind of showcase your project or do some interviews or appear in social media or on some of Creative Scotland's materials. That's completely optional, but we'll sort of come to that once we've got there. Okay, finally finished. So that's the application form and the fund. Now we'll basically just save the rest of the time for questions. So I hope anyone's noted down my email address. I'll pop it in the chat as well, but I'll stop sharing just so we can all see each other. Here we go. Hello. Oh, I've finally got an overview of everyone in here. Yeah, take it away. If anyone's got any questions, please just go for it. Jan, I think I can see you talking, but you're on mute at the moment.
Good.
Go for it, Michelle, you're unmuted.
Oh, hiya. No, I'd asked the question before, but can young people that are on the trust actually apply as an individual?
Yeah, we've spoken about that, so that should be absolutely fine. Yeah, we'll just have to manage it on the youth panel day. There's going to be people who need to kind of step out and make sure that they're not involved in decisions on their own applications or their young, like their youth groups applications.
Cool.
Jan, did you have one? Sorry.
Yeah, my question is there a limit to how many people can apply from the same youth group?
No, not at all, really. I mean, because we're looking at the young people's names, so it would be sort of an application per young person, or if it's a group of young people from your youth group, it would be the group of young people. So that won't affect it at all, really. It's just the only thing that might be is if it's all the same project, that would be slightly odd, I guess, to us, because we'd want it to be entirely kind of youth led. So if we could really see that it's kind of distinct things that young people are applying for, that they're really keen for, that like wouldn't make a difference.
They'd be different. They're completely different ages, so they would different.
Exactly. Then that wouldn't impact at all.
They'd have completely different opinions. And the other question I have, would it? So they may say they're all primary 1 to 3, and there was different groups within that. Say there was maybe 6 groups of 2. Could they all apply? Could they all apply for different projects?
Yeah, as long as it's all different young people or different groups of young people, then
Right.
There's no limit, really.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No worries.
That's all.
Any other questions? Nicole.
Hi. Yeah, so I was wondering if a group applies and then it takes like till July to get the money. If there are other young people from the same group that then says, oh, I want in on that project, what would that be allowed? Or would that be kind of like, no, just the original group that kind of formulated the idea?
I see what you mean. So you're saying if it was like a group of 3 or 4 young people who came up with the project and then they got other young people from the group involved as the time went on, that would be absolutely fine. Yeah, as long as it's still youth led and it's coming from a group of young people and they're the ones who are kind of pushing it forward, they can get other young people involved. That's no problem.
Fantastic, thank you.
No worries.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Yes, go for it.
So my daughter sort of started a group for neurodivergent girls, and lots of the activities that we do are art based. When you're talking about a project, does it need to have like a full-on outcome, or can it lend itself more to that description of the first steps, that exploring lots of different opportunities? Would that sort of work, or does it have to be an explicit outcome?
No, that's absolutely fine. The sort of exploratory kind of process led stuff is all good. The main thing that we'll be looking out for is those criteria that kind of come with the fund. So they're pretty broad, as you're seeing. So yeah, that's absolutely fine. And like the young grant makers, you know, they've thought a lot about kind of how that process supports young people's mental health and expression and confidence. So yeah, keen to support that kind of stuff, for sure.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Any other questions? We've done an absolutely record time. The last webinar had loads of questions for me. But absolutely fine if we have done them all. Oh, Jan, I can see you're on mute.
We're meeting later this week and into next week. The different groups and the different sort of their wee thinking just now. So there probably will be questions.
Mhm.
Is it best just to email?
Yeah.
Because-
I'm around, basically. I'm on hand to answer anything. So as they come through, drop me an email. And if it's something you feel it would be easier to discuss by phone, I can give you a ring back if you just pop it in your email. That would be useful.
Yeah, because that might be helpful because yeah.